Hey guys, we often hear the expression, there is safety in numbers, especially when people need to emphasize some collective action or there is a need for teamwork when they understand that it would be hard to make a change on their own, or even when they're looking for an excuse. However, there's also an expression about a one-man army, meaning that even one person is capable of achieving a lot, capable of changing the lives of dozens of people, capable of literally moving mountains if it's ever needed. Today we're going to talk about a man who proved that nothing is impossible for a determined person. His story began many years ago, in distant 1959, when a young 23-year-old man named Huang Dafa returned after studying in the city to his home village of Haowangva, located in the north of China's Huzhou province. After having spent a few years in the so-called civilization, all he found in his home village was hunger. His fellow villagers were extremely poor, and the only thing that saved them from starvation were potatoes and corn, which they grew. But the worst part was that the village had no water. The only well was drying up each year. They used it in turns, strictly observing the rules, which was barely enough to cook food. Therefore, they couldn't even grow the most basic of the Chinese culture grains, such as rice. They simply didn't have enough water. Moreover, the Haowangva village didn't even have the most basic utilities, such as electricity. And of course, they had no roads, as the village was cut off from civilization by a mountain. The man had many ideas. He wanted to change the situation like no one else, and as he then thought, people united by a common idea would turn the undeveloped, God-forsaken village into a modern and successful settlement. He couldn't have even imagined at the time what hardships he'd have to face and how many years of his life it would take for him to turn his dream into a reality. Huang decided to significantly improve the lives of his fellow villagers and set several goals for himself: to build a road, to bring electricity, and solve the water shortage problem. It is for these good intentions that the villagers elected him to the position of head of the village that same year. The first thing that Huang did was search for a water source. He found one in the neighboring settlement. It'd be great if only it wasn't located on the other side of a huge mountain. The village obviously didn't have money to build a canal, and the district authorities refused to allocate any money for it. Huang met with dozens of government officials before he realized that no one cared neither for his village nor for its villagers. After giving it some thought, Huang decided to build the canal through the mountain on his own. As he later said, his parents raised him to be a man of his word, so he couldn't go back on his promise. And that's how Huang's battle with the mountain began. Armed with a pickaxe and some of the most primitive tools, the man began to make a tunnel in the mountain. Looking at these pictures, it's hard to believe that he dug the first 100 meters alone without any help. The work was further complicated by the fact that the canal went along the steep side of the mountain, and the risk of just falling off one day was huge. The villagers initially supported Huang's idea, but as it often happens, when it came to doing the actual work, he was left alone with his pickaxe and the mountain. It took over 5 years for the locals to notice the changes and to actually believe in the crazy plan of the head of the village. Soon, other like-minded people began to join him. There were more and more of them each year, reaching almost 300 people eventually. And 10 years later, the 200-meter canal in the mountain was ready. But to everyone's disappointment, it turned out that since the enthusiasts lacked knowledge of irrigation, all their work was in vain. The long-awaited, vital water didn't come. Jumping ahead, I'll say that now this canal is used as a tunnel to shorten the path through the mountains, but the main goal still wasn't achieved. Perhaps someone else would have given up, especially after failing to deliver on his promise, but not our guy. Having failed, Huang went to the city for a few years to study the principles of water supply. Having completed an internship at one of the hydroelectric power plants, he came back with the necessary knowledge and experience. He was also able to convince the district administration to allocate 60,000 won, which is about $12,000, to the poor village, while the villagers, who continued to suffer from the never-ending drought, donated another $2,000. And thus, the work on getting the water supply from the village had resumed. When Huang began to build his first canal, he was still very young, only 23 years old. And when he was finally done, he was already a 58-year-old man. One could say that Huang's entire life was dedicated to that canal through the mountains. He was a hostage of the canal at his own free will. He would later say that in those decades, he never once wanted to abandon his goals, regardless of how hard he had to work. Huang always knew that he had to finish the project. In 1992, the work of the second canal began, and this time Huang was sure it would work. Once again, the work was mainly done by manual labor, but this time they did use some light equipment. It took another 3 years to build the 7,200 meters of the canal and 2,200 meters of bypass canals. The canal goes through 3 mountains, 10 hills, and 3 other villages. As hard as it was, by 1995 the canal began to function. By that time, 2 other goals, electricity and roads, had already been reached, also thanks to Huang's efforts. When it was all done, the innovations have changed the lives of about 2,000 people in Huang's home village and about 7,000 residents of the neighboring villages. They all began to grow rice, about 500,000 kilograms per year, and breed animals. The community now has about 60 hectares of irrigated and fertile land. Thanks to one person, the life of the entire village has completely changed. People's quality of life has improved. Children began to get an education. Today, they have about 30 college graduates for every 100 families. However, to make the villagers happy, Huang deprived himself of a lot. He lost his daughter and other family members without even getting a chance to say goodbye to them, as he always had to be in the mountains, working and overseeing the progress. He is now 83 years old, and he still goes to the mountains once in a while to check if the canal, which now bears his name, is working properly. As you can see from this story, nothing is impossible for a focused and determined person, for a one-man army. It took 36 years of his life to make his home village wealthy and to win his battle with the mountain. So friends, do you agree that anyone can change the course of history? Don't forget to comment. We'd love to hear your opinions. Well, that's it for today. Rate our video if you liked it, subscribe to our channel, and give us a thumbs up. We'll see you next time.